highly explosive. Donald Trump has just released an 8-point non-tariff fraud list on how not to deal with the USA. And this is another deceptive tactic by the USA against other nations. We need to take a look at this. The whole thing is highly explosive. Additionally, Bitcoin is currently rising, and it looks like a Bitcoin rebound is happening. Additionally, we have new statements from Michael Saylor, who is really talking about how more people indirectly hold Bitcoin than one might imagine. And this is all hyper bullish for Bitcoin because more and more critics and Bitcoin haters also have indirect Bitcoin exposure. And Michael Saylor has struck again and is buying Bitcoin once more. We see Bitcoin right now at the time of recording at over 86,000 US dollars. And that's very, very exciting because the futures, that is, the futures markets, the pre-announced stock markets here, have opened negatively, meaning they opened in the red. This means we are increasingly seeing the tendency for Bitcoin to decouple somewhat. Of course, it's not completely decoupled yet, but Bitcoin is currently performing better than the stock markets. And that is a very, very positive sign. I have always told you that when Bitcoin decouples, even if it's not a major decoupling yet, it is a positive sign which will drive more investors to Bitcoin in the future. Bitcoin has now even risen above the $87,000 mark, and Zero Hedge makes a very, very important point here. He says, there it is finally. The dollar is collapsing, and suddenly Bitcoin is rising here. We are now seeing the dollar devalue massively, and historically, that has always been the sign that Bitcoin rises. And I told you this 2 or 3 weeks ago. It's now just a matter of time before Bitcoin will rise here. When liquidity simply increases, then Bitcoin must also rise here. The US dollar index is devaluing. That means Bitcoin is appreciating. But this doesn't happen in real time, rather always with a slight delay. And now it really looks like this is the case. We also see the global money supply massively increasing. Pumping. All major global central banks are pumping money into the markets. The ECB has lowered interest rates again, and so on. The only one is the US Central Bank, which is still hesitating a bit, but it will also pump liquidity into the market. And then it will turn out even more positively for Bitcoin. Just briefly, I made a video yesterday about losing 10 Bitcoin on an exchange or having the Bitcoin locked up. I also mentioned that it was just a fictional scenario to simply explain the issue that certain exchanges here are locking users' Bitcoin. You can watch the video if you like, where I explain it in detail. But I don't know why a few people misunderstood it. They actually thought those were my Bitcoin that were being locked or frozen. No, my Bitcoin would not be locked or frozen there. I would also never leave 10 Bitcoin on an exchange. But just to clarify here, maybe it was poorly phrased, I don't know. Anyway, now let's dive right into the video. I just saw the article from Zero Hedge earlier, and it simply states that everything is currently in the transition phase. From a tariff phase now to a deal phase where the deals are coming in. Some people were hoping that maybe over Easter one or another deal would be announced. But if we look at what actually happened over Easter, it's not really that much. Here, Kobe Saylor summarized it quite well. He says here, first, no trade agreements would be announced. So, we also have no deals. Second, Trump releases a list of non-tariff frauds. We'll look at that later because it's highly explosive. And then third, Trump says that those who criticize tariffs are bad at business. So, he simply criticized a few people who criticized the Donald Trump issue. I mean, he just strikes back. And then it says here, 79 days of tariff pause. The mutual tariffs. And then down here, the question remains, where are the trade agreements that the markets priced in last week? This is really relevant because it's the new list that Donald Trump has released here. And he published it here on Truth Social, I believe. Or is this X? I don't really know. Either X or Truth Social. In any case, he has 8 points here. He calls it non-tariff, cheating. And it's simply another definition of what is considered cheating here. And what is not. Is it perhaps also meant to put some pressure on other countries? And of course, you can justify it better to them with such a list. That means it's all quite arbitrary. That means someone has to define, okay, what is right here, what is wrong here? And many have already criticized the formula that Donald Trump published, saying it's simply an arbitrary formula for how the tariffs are calculated here. And in the same way, certain definitions are made now, where perhaps some might say it's arbitrary, while others say it's justified, like here, yes, tariff manipulation, declared, because Donald Trump always complains that China is manipulating, and so on. But he makes 8 points here now. And the first point, we're going through this point by point now, is right here. Currency manipulation. So countries artificially lower their currencies to make exports cheaper and more competitive. And that's also, for example, what's happening in China, where they have manually pushed the exchange rate down. Donald Trump simply says that this is an unfair tactic because if the USA imposes tariffs on Chinese products, but the Chinese then artificially or manually devalue their currency, then it is, of course, on average, to create more demand for Chinese products, even though tariffs would already be imposed here, which should actually generate less demand for Chinese products. Then secondly, here, value-added tax like tariffs or subsidies. In the end, it's simple. Some countries impose high value-added taxes on imports or provide rebates on exports. It acts like a hidden tariff. And this should also be curbed here. Then here, the third point, dumping and production costs. Products are sold abroad below the manufacturing price to destroy markets and displace local suppliers. So this is often done with cartel agreements, or, for example, by offering certain products not to make profits, but simply to essentially ruin the competitor. And this can not only be done between different companies against each other, for example, one retail chain setting dumping prices against another retail chain, but it can also be done across countries, and if something like this happens, it is not tolerated. And it is definitely declared as fraud according to this list here. If they provide export and state subsidies to governments, money, so that companies can export cheaper. Exports. And that is an unfair advantage in global trade. So, for example, if a company massively subsidizes a certain sector, this can effectively lift tariffs here by the fact that the government artificially creates demand for certain products, is created. This is also a tactic that apparently is not well regarded here. Then fifth, agricultural. Protection standards, strict rules. For example, no genetically modified corn in the EU prevents imports from the USA, supposedly for protection, but actually protectionist. So yes, I can't say much about it, but yes, it seems this is also not well regarded here. Then we have sixth, protection. Technical standards, and seventh, product counterfeiting, piracy, and theft are also interesting again. Intellectual property worth over $1 million is apparently lost here, because China and other countries simply steal intellectual property here. This is such a huge topic, whether something like intellectual property even exists. In my opinion, patents are always a scam because patents always lead to increased prices in the market. Thoughts are free. One should not try to tax or charge for any thoughts here, whatever they may be, or whatever. And from that perspective, yes, I know this is a hot topic. Some people also find it really, really great that there are patents here. But in my opinion, this is also where, for example, Jack Dorsey and Elon Musk have strongly advocated for some patents to be suspended. Elon Musk has also released some patents he previously held for certain products or technologies into the market, making them open source. And in my opinion, open source is the better approach compared to relying on patents. That's simply the Bitcoin approach, but the traditional world still relies on patents. And it is definitely heavily sanctioned when China and others counterfeit US products or other products. That means it's absolutely not, at least according to Donald Trump. And then there's the focus on transshipment and tariff evasion. I'm not entirely sure what is meant by that, to be honest. Transshipment of tariffs. I have no idea what exactly is meant by that. These are probably some tactics on how to evade tariffs, maybe by routing through other countries, then through 2 or 3 other checkpoints, and then essentially delivering products here. And perhaps avoiding tariffs or something like that. That's how I might imagine it. So we definitely need to keep an eye on this. This is already a very, very interesting story that's unfolding here. I think I mentioned in another video that there were such reports about how, yes, Spot Besson and Howard Whitnick wanted to stop Donald Trump from further rolling out all the tariff issues here, because by now the economy might be lagging a bit and many people are complaining. Many people might be losing trust in politics. And yes, of course, one must also keep an eye on or have control over the government bond market. In any case, these are the developments surrounding the tariff issue. I mean, this won't lead to a massive sell-off or a massive pump or anything like that just because you're publishing the list here, but simply other interesting conditions. By the way, just briefly for those who actually think this is my real beard, this is, of course, just sand. Feel free to write in the comments below what you think is the coolest full beard, like Hitler style. Just here, like Karani style, what you think is the coolest. Then I'll make more videos like that in the future. Yeah, whatever you like the most. Or I can also not cover myself with sand at all. We can certainly do that too. It's of course the best healing clay here except for El Salvador. And you also have to hit the like button and the subscribe button so that YouTube now promotes the sandbar videos that you post. And here the algorithm brings it all into the mainstream. Let's take a look at what's currently happening with Michael Saylor, because he has posted his Dort list again. That means when you see the video, Michael Saylor will announce it today, that he is probably buying Bitcoin. It's just to be expected. It has always been like that in the past. When you publish the chart more in the orange there, then it simply means buying can happen here, and it's naturally interesting and exciting to see how much Bitcoin he will purchase. Michael Saylor just keeps buying more. That's really massive. It's now over 500,000 Bitcoin here in the state. I also found a very interesting assessment here from David Bailey, who actually says here, MicroStrategy Bitcoin is not the spot Bitcoin times the number of Bitcoin, meaning the number of Bitcoin value here, but rather it is the replacement cost. What makes up the value of MicroStrategy? Try buying 500,000 Bitcoin and see how much it costs you. So that's exactly the concept one needs to understand. For example, one could simply say, okay, Bitcoin is currently worth, let's say, 80,000, 85,000, and MicroStrategy has 500,000 Bitcoin. And accordingly, one evaluates MicroStrategy. But he says one should evaluate it at the current moment, what it would cost now to buy 500,000 Bitcoin. If you were to buy 500,000 Bitcoin now, the Bitcoin price would be massively pumped up due to slippage being created. That means you can only buy it over a longer period of time. And that means the statement also implies that a large part or a significant portion of the value here of MicroStrategy is that MicroStrategy has accumulated the Bitcoin over a very long period of time. And it's something completely different and represents a completely different value than if you were to suddenly buy 500,000 Bitcoin just like that. Buying on the spot doesn't work like that. You can't accumulate such a large amount. You can't accumulate it within 1 or 2 months or something like that. You can only do that over years. And that's the important point that David Bailey is making here. MicroStrategy, yes, might be incorrectly valued by many. It's always a question of how you value MicroStrategy. There's the MNAV. So, how much Bitcoin is there in relation to the underlying stock, or how much Bitcoin per share? That's how it should actually be said, how much Bitcoin per share. And then some say, okay, MicroStrategy is now overvalued because the MNAV is over 2 or the MNAV is now over 3 or whatever. So if you have, for example, an MNAV of 1.8 or something like that, it simply means that here, 1.8 times valuation, MicroStrategy has compared to the underlying Bitcoin that are held here. And then some say, okay, that would now be overvalued because it should more or less align. The Bitcoin holdings should be relatively close in relation to the MicroStrategy share prices. And others then say, no, there are special effects like what David Bailey describes, for example, that you couldn't just buy the 500,000 Bitcoin instantly at spot. And that's why a higher MNAV is justified. And other people say, for example, that a very, very high MNAV also be justified because MicroStrategy has special effects like being able to easily raise capital, being leveraged, which adds a certain value, or that they might become a kind of Bitcoin bank in the future and so on. And these are speculations about the future where people sometimes say, okay, that's why. And overvaluation, in quotes, is justified here. In any case, Michael Saylor had a very, very interesting, yes, day now, regarding MicroStrategy to Bitcoin holders, or rather not to MicroStrategy, but more to Bitcoin holders. He said here, according to public data from the first quarter of 2025, there are more than 13,000 institutions and an estimated 814,000 private customer accounts directly here with MicroStrategy, so they basically hold the share directly. And then he continues here, an estimated 55 million beneficiaries are indirectly engaged through ETFs, investment funds, pensions, and insurance portfolios. And that's the crazy thing you need to understand here. That means we have nearly 1 million or so people who directly hold MicroStrategy here. But we have 55 million who indirectly hold MicroStrategy here. And it could even be that in the future, this number increases with many more people having indirect exposure, not just to MicroStrategy, but also to Bitcoin in general. Because what if MicroStrategy gets included in the major indices? I mean, MicroStrategy is already included in some indices. What if they get included in even larger indices? And it's the same with Bitcoin. If more companies hold Bitcoin, then the indices will also, which many people then buy. Many people do this, they just buy an MSCI World, NASDAQ, S&P 500 index. Then more and more people will have exposure. And if pension funds and so on join in pension funds and even some universities and so on that go into Bitcoin with their portfolios, then we have a very, very large indirect flow. This is, of course, very, very good for the Bitcoin price development. Yes, feel free to write in the comments below what you think about the current developments, about the fraud lists here regarding MicroStrategy. I also uploaded a video yesterday at the end where I addressed it, that Michael Saylor is indeed very, very bullish. 50 million until you are here with Bitcoin, and the comments are always here. A lot of people are convinced, but many have also become very critical, noting that neither they are with Bitcoin. I am relatively neutral on that. I don't see a major point of attack here. This is here to bring Bitcoin to failure like many others. But hey, if you still want to buy Bitcoin, I'll put a link below for you to 21 Bitcoin. Here you can buy Bitcoin easily, securely, and simply. And with the code Bitcoin, you can get up to 20% off the fees when buying Bitcoin. Peace out.